Okay, so where are we? Right, so I have knit a bit of a rib here. It's not as large as the rib that the pattern suggests. You need, I think, an inch and a half of rib, but I need to crack on with the videos. Time is short, so I've just done a small rib here. It's a 2x2 rib. If you need help to get to this stage, please do refer back to the previous emails where it's all covered how to do so. I've got my stitch marker in place, and I'm now moving on just to knit one complete round of knit stitches, and I've left it so I haven't got to this point because I wanted to show you something. Because we are going to be working with two colours, not just the main colour, which I've chosen as this blue colour, because we're going to be working with a main and a contrast colour, we need to introduce our contrast colour just before the end of this round, and I'm going to show you how to do that when I get there. So I'm on the last few stitches, and I want to introduce my contrast colour because what I'd like to do is I'd like to have that sort of neatly held in place right at the beginning of the next round, so that it's nice and secure when I come to need to use it, rather than just using it on the first stitch where it's required, because that just creates a little bit of a gap and sort of some tension. The tension's not so good. So I'm going to show you how I do it, and this I think is quite a reasonable tip. So I've got my contrast colour. I'm going to just put my needle in as if to knit as usual, and I'm going to take the tail of the contrast colour and just lay it over the top of the needle. Okay, so it's just going over the top of the working needle, the right hand needle. I'm now going to bring my yarn round and just create the stitch in the normal way, and what that's done is trapped the yarn. Can you see? Trapped the yarn at the back there. And to further secure it, I'm going to do one more stitch with nothing happening, and now I'm going to put my needle in as if to knit again, and I'm going to take the yarn, the working end of the yarn, so the longer end, the working end of the contrast yarn, sorry it's all got tangled up, the working end of the contrast yarn, and put it over the top, can you see, of the right hand needle. I'm now going to wrap the yarn, the main yarn and around the needle to knit it, and take that contrast yarn off. And when I knit that stitch, the yarn is again in the right position to be caught in nicely. So I'm going to finish the last stitch, and when I make the last stitch, that's going to be held completely. That yarn is now held completely securely in place. Can you see that little dash there? Completely securely in place at the back of the work, ready for when the first time it is needed. Right, we can delay no longer. We've got to bring in the chart. Now, we're going to be working down in this corner to begin with. Now, don't forget what I said. If you've not watched the sort of chart bit earlier, go back and have a look at that. You're only going to be starting right in this corner if you have cast on the most number of stitches. So if you've cast on the 88 for the large size, you're going to be starting at this edge, so at just in front of this red line, if you've cast on a medium size, so 76 stitches. And if you've cast on the small size like I have, you're going to be starting just to the right of this red line. Okay, the stitch number is 13 there. Unlucky for some, but lucky for us. So as you know, each of the squares here represent a stitch. So these first two stitches I can see on my round are blue, or main colour. Your main colour could be a different colour, but for me, I'm using blue just so it's sort of a clear indicator. So I'm going to make this, here's my stitch marker to denote the beginning of the round. My first two stitches are blue. So I'm going to leave the contrast colour and knit 2 stitches in blue. Now I'm going to need to work 1 contrast colour stitch. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring my yarn forward, pick up the cream yarn and just work a stitch. And what I want you to do is leave that loose at the back. So sort of like a loop. Don't bring it tight. In fact, I might even loosen that a little bit more, because your socks have got to stretch if I pull them like this, they're more likely to sort of be sitting like this, sitting like this on your leg than sitting like this on your leg. So when that yarn travels across the back, whichever colour that's not being used, when it travels across the back, there needs to be a lot of play in that, what is called a float, so that there is space for it to stretch out. Now, another important thing to learn, contrast colour. We want that pattern, the pattern on our sock, we want that to pop out. We want that to look really pronounced. So the way we do that, it is unbelievably sort of simple, and I don't know the science behind it, but it seems to work. Our contrast colour must always pass underneath our main colour. So when I am now going to go back and work, sorry, let's bring it in again. I've done my one contrast colour stitch. I've now got 5 blue stitches. When I'm now going to use my blue yarn or my main yarn, it needs to pass over the top of the cream yarn, over the top, okay, not underneath like so, but over the top. So that cream yarn or contrast yarn has always got to sit closest to the work. So I'm going to do 5 stitches in the main colour, 1, 2, and 5 is a good run of stitches, so we can have another look at passing that 2, 4, passing that yarn along with the float. Okay, so I've now completed 4 stitches in the blue. I'm going to bring it forward so that when I bring the contrast colour into play, it's coming underneath that blue strand or the main colour strand. So the contrast colour strand comes underneath the main colour strand, and I'm going to do another contrast stitch. And again, I'm going to try and space my stitches out nicely on the needle so they're a bit stretched, which means that yarn is travelling as far as it probably will need to when it's sitting on your leg. All right, so I've made the stitch, and if you look, it's a good you know, there's a good amount of give in that float. Right, so it's just one there, and I'm now back to 5 blue or 5 main colour stitch again, and we know that the blue is going to go over, or the main colour, sorry, the main colour is going to go over the top of the contrast colour, so I can just go ahead and knit 5 more of those. Now, it may surprise you to learn that that's all I'm going to do all the way around. If I look at my pattern, 4 and 5, the pattern repeats like that all the way along this first row. 5 main colour, 1 contrast, 5 main, 1 contrast, 5 main, 1 contrast, all the way along. Okay, so you will find when you look at fairisle or stranded knitting, in the whole, it's terrifying, but all it actually is, it's 1 row at a time. And you're working 2 colours, that's all. And when you break it right down, you're working 1 colour on 1 stitch. So that's all it is. When you look at it as an individual row, it's actually not too scary at all. So when I say to you, you're working fairisle now, you're working stranded knitting, and all you're going to do is do 5 main colour stitches and 1 contrast colour stitch, that doesn't sound too scary at all, does it? And that is all you're going to do for this row. So what I think you should concentrate on to start with, and again, if you want to do a little sample piece, don't be afraid to take it back, because you know, if you're just sort of starting out with fairisle, you need to accept you're going to have to take some back. So it might be a good idea to do a little practice so you can get your tension right, pull it back and start again. I don't know that we've got enough, I don't know if there is enough that you can sort of do a complete tension and a practice piece and keep it. So perhaps use some spare yarn or something just to get practiced with taking these floats across the back and making sure that you're passing the contrast yarn underneath the main yarn and you're passing the main yarn over the top of the contrast yarn. So those are the things to focus on, keeping those floats nice and loose and making sure that you're passing the yarn either over or under as appropriate. Okay, and that is all I think you need to worry about on the first round at least, and probably indeed for subsequent rounds really. I think I will do a couple of rounds with you, because what it will be helpful, I think, for you to see how you can always use the previous round to show you where you should be on your current round. I like to use little anchor points throughout things, because often I'm trying to half watch the telly or half parent a child and trying to sort of focus on a whole big pattern. Complicated fairisle pattern is very often beyond my mental capability, so using anchor points of what's gone before is a nice neat little trick, and I will show you how to do that. I'm just going to complete this round and we'll have a look at the next one together.